One of the oldest debates in psychology and philosophy is the mind-body problem. Are mind and body two fundamentally different kinds of reality? Or can mental life be explained without treating the mind as a separate substance? This debate is often introduced as dualism versus non-dualism, but for William James, the more important shift is methodological. What kind of explanation should psychology aim for? James's functionalism does not merely offer a new label. It changes what we think counts as understanding the mind. Dualism, in its classic form, claims that mental phenomena and physical phenomena belong to different categories. The mind is not simply the brain. It is a distinct kind of thing, often imagined as an immaterial substance or principle. Dualism can feel intuitively plausible because subjective experience does not look like matter from the inside. Thoughts, feelings, and meanings do not appear as mass and motion. The dualist concludes that something non-physical must be involved. James does not dismiss this intuition as stupid. He understands why it arises. But he is skeptical of turning that intuition into a metaphysical conclusion that blocks inquiry. For James, the key question is not what is the mind made of, but what work does the concept of mind allow us to do in explaining experience and behavior? This is where his pragmatism and his functional psychology converge. Instead of treating the mind as a mysterious inner substance, James treats mental life as a set of functions within an organism navigating a world. Functionalism, in James's sense, asks what mental processes do. What role does attention play in selecting experience? How do habits stabilize behavior? How do emotions recruit bodily readiness for action? How does the stream of consciousness guide decision and meaning? These questions do not require us to decide in advance whether mind is an immaterial substance. They require us to describe the patterns of experience and the roles those patterns play in a life. In that sense, functionalism shifts psychology from metaphysics toward explanation by operations and consequences. This does not mean James reduces mind to mere behavior. He is deeply committed to describing consciousness as lived, continuous, selective, purposive, and irreducible to a simple inventory of parts. But his point is that psychology advances when it studies how mental life operates, not when it argues endlessly about what kind of stuff mind must be. A debate about substance becomes meaningful only if it implies differences in how we should investigate, predict, or interpret experience. That is a pragmatic standard of meaning. James's theory of emotion shows the same shift. The James Lange perspective ties emotion to bodily change and to the perception of that change. Whether one accepts every detail, the method is revealing. The explanation is framed in terms of functional relation stimulus. Bodily readiness, felt experience, rather than a separate mental substance that causes the body. James is mapping connections within experience and organism, not inserting an extra metaphysical entity to close the story. The same is true of attention and will. James treats will as the effort of attention sustained long enough to act. Again, this is a functional description. It explains agency in terms of how attention selects, how habit channels behavior, and how effort stabilizes choice. A dualist can still believe in an immaterial mind, but James would ask what additional explanatory work that belief performs. If it does not change what we can observe, predict, or train, it risks becoming a verbal solution rather than a scientific one. Historically, James is writing at a moment when psychology is trying to separate itself from philosophy while still taking subjective experience seriously. Dualism is one temptation. It honors experience but can make it scientifically untouchable. Reductionism is another temptation. It honors science but can flatten experience into mechanism. James tries to avoid both extremes. Functionalism keeps experience central stream-like, selective, meaningful while framing explanation in terms of roles, relations, and consequences. If we connect this to modern philosophy of mind, we can see why James still matters. Contemporary functionalism often defines mental states by their causal roles in a system, inputs, Internal states, outputs. James is not identical to modern computational functionalism, but the family resemblance is real. He treats mental life as organized by function, and he evaluates concepts by what they allow us to explain. In a pragmatic spirit, he asks not only is dualism true, but what does dualism help us do that functional explanation cannot? A standard dualist reply is that functional descriptions miss the qualitative feel of experience. What philosophers call the what it is like. James would accept that subjective quality is real. But he would resist the idea that the reality of subjective quality forces a substance theory. He is willing to say, experience is a fundamental datum. Psychology must describe it faithfully. But explanations should remain accountable to relations we can trace and consequences we can test. The goal is not metaphysical comfort. The goal is intelligibility. So, the Jamesian conclusion is not a simplistic rejection of dualism. It is a reorientation. James shifts the center of gravity from substance debates to functional descriptions of mental life, attention, habit, emotion, will, and the stream of consciousness as lived. If a metaphysical position makes no difference to inquiry, James treats it as philosophically idle. If it makes a difference, then the difference must be stated in concrete terms. That is how the mind-body problem becomes intellectually responsible rather than purely rhetorical.